All right, welcome everybody to this edition of O365A. In tonight's episode, we're going to give you a heads up on some breaking changes that have either been announced and are happening or are going to happen in the next 60 days. So you might want to pay attention to these because if you're not aware of them, they could cause you some unexpected downtime and pain. So to kick us off, Dino, why don't you tell us about some changes coming up?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. So pretty important one, I'd say. The way you assign and manage numbers in Teams is changing. So previously, or as you're probably used to at the moment, you're using a setCS user to set phone numbers if you're managing on-prem users. If you're managing cloud users, you're likely using the setCS online voice user commandlets for calling plans. Those are actually going away. The setCS user won't be, but the minus on-prem phone number will be. So there's actually 4 changes coming to commandlets. So the setCS user, where you're dealing with direct routing numbers, setCS online voice user for calling plans, and then when you're talking about resource accounts, both on-prem and in the cloud, or for direct routing and for calling plans, you would have been using the setCS online application instance commandlet and the setCS online voice application instance to set up resource accounts and calling plans. So all that, so the good news is that they're going to be condensed into one commandlet called setCS phone number assignment. So that's a total bonus because it was always kind of problematic to remember which commandlet am I using for which object. So now we're blessed that we can use one single commandlet to deal with all these. The other bonus is that if you're used to dealing with calling plans, you had to first get all your users and find their object IDs. So your scripting had to do something where you had to pre-figure out what your object IDs were for all the users. You probably had to stick it in a spreadsheet somewhere, and then there was a lot of chance for error with that if you just copied and pasted incorrectly. So that all goes away. You can use UPN in this new commandlet, which is a bonus. The setCS phone number assignment will have a minus phone number type attribute where you can specify either direct routing, calling plan, or operator connect. So here we have one commandlet that deals with all 3 of these, which is great. And the other thing that it's doing is allowing you to set enterprise voice enabled to true. So the minus phone number switch, when you specify a phone number, automatically enables enterprise voice enabled to true, which is nice because that used to be a separate step. You'd have to kind of, with direct routing as a service, you'd have to assign the number, you'd have to turn on enterprise voice enabled to true and hosted voicemail to true. So now that all goes away as well. The docs, I mean, this command is in preview. The docs talk about how that works, but there's an interesting scenario we were talking about off camera, and that's for direct routing as a service. If you just wanted to enable a user that just didn't have a DID and was making outbound calls, today the documentation says that as soon as you remove a phone number from a user, it turns enterprise voice enabled to false, which means it would break that user's outbound calling capabilities. So I'm hoping that that's not true, and there's still some stuff to be shared with us, and that's why commandlets are in preview. But certainly we'll be following up with the product group to ask them about that, and maybe we'll post it on our site as a addendum or in line with this podcast as well, so that any new information we have. So check our site regularly for that, and we'll try to post any deets on that. So in the short term, just be aware of this and update your scripts, because I'm starting to see stuff go wonky with current scripts on the old commandlets. So if you have any migrations coming up, you might want to just do some dry runs and some tests to make sure your scripts are still working. If not, you want to start using the setCS phone number assignment. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Michael.
Sure, thanks, Dino. Just the one item on the phone number assignment. A welcome change is that in the Teams admin center, we can now set direct routing numbers on a per user basis. So along with all these changes, and I think the underlying commandlet that is setting phone numbers for regardless of the service type, the ability to do that now in the Teams Admin Center for Operator Connect, calling plans, and direct routing is definitely a welcome addition if you're doing kind of one-off changes. But yeah, the PowerShell changes for bulk actions and onboarding is definitely something that a lot of enterprises are going to have to wrap their heads around, update their scripts and their provisioning processes. Going on with the kind of voice theme, a lot of changes happening around the direct routing service. So this is you're deploying session border controllers or SBCs, or you're subscribing to a managed direct routing service, and you're really bringing your own telephony service to Microsoft Teams. Well, there's been I think there's about 4 announcements that are of upcoming changes that could potentially take this service down for your users if you haven't planned ahead of time. And so some of these settings, and unfortunately a lot of session border controllers that are deployed, it's usually like that, set it and forget it, or set it and don't adjust it. So going back to organizations and asking them to kind of modify a critical infrastructure component definitely has a lot of customers maybe not panicking, but asking questions like, is this going to impact me? Am I ready for this? And so some of these changes are if your SBCs are configured to use the SIP-all records, and this was a way of enumerating all the Microsoft IPs for the different SIP gateways. And so that is going away. So your config should be using either SIP.SIP2 and SIP3 like pstnhub.microsoft.com. Really, your firewall rules should be adjusted to the 52.112.0.0 or the 52.120.0.0 subnets for allowing kind of that SIP traffic. So if any firewall rules or your SBCs are configured using SIP-all, you want to make sure to adjust those. The other change is if any of the integrations that you're doing through your session border controller is leveraging SIP replaces headers, Microsoft's going to stop responding or processing those requests. So you want to make sure that you configure your SBC to adjust to maybe refers or some other mechanism to do those integrations instead of using those replaces headers. Another item around certificates, the SIP-alls is going away March 1st of this year. SIP replaces is going away kind of beginning of April of this year. And then the new item is there's a list of approved certificate authorities that are part of the Microsoft Trusted Root Certificate program. And so that means that your certificate that you put on your session border controller has to be issued off of one of those root certs in that program. And so that change is happening right on kind of the beginning of February. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. I believe, like from what I've looked at, all the original approved certificate providers that for direct routing were in this list. So I think it's just a larger list of CAs that are now supported versus a smaller list or a segment of that. So I don't think this is much something to be concerned about, but definitely double check your cert, make sure it's off of the right root certificate. The other kind of certificate related item is you need to make sure that your session border controller or SBC is talking to Microsoft using TLS 1.2. So that's going to be enforced again on February 1st. So this was part of most of the configurations of the the session border controller documentation. So I don't think this is going to be a concern. But again, just some of these announcements are a little bit more scary than maybe it kind of leads it to be. But if you do have an invalid configuration, this could be a problem for you. So I mean, one of I guess the benefits if you're using like a managed direct routing partner, the burden really is on them to adjust these, and this is not something you have to do. If you are managing your own session border controls, then it really border controls, then it's really on you to make sure that they are configured correctly to the the Microsoft workload, and that you're monitoring these changes. One other item, just to wrap up the voice side, U.S. customers. Microsoft has released that work from home dynamic address feature. This was really to support the compliance with the RABOM Act. And so it really is meant for US customers. And so that has been rolled out in standard Microsoft tenants and GCC High. but it isn't rolled out in the DoD tenants. So if you're a customer that falls in that realm, Microsoft is still kind of holding off on rolling that functionality out. So that will be communicated at a further date. It's just no timeline right now. With that, I know that was a lot of voice items. I'll throw it to Hab.
Yeah, so on the Office, Microsoft Office side of things, so in Teams, we're getting the ability to have recordings automatically expire and be deleted. I think default is 60 days. And last year Microsoft, I guess, move the storage locations from Microsoft Stream into OneDrive and SharePoint, depending on where you create the meeting itself. And then so what this will do, given there's some capacity limits, obviously, in OneDrive and SharePoint, want to make sure that you don't have these large recording files in there that you may not need for a long period of time. So they've introduced this, retirement, or I guess deletion capability from a Teams meeting policy. So the expiration setting, it's not a retention setting. It just basically sets a flag on the file to say deleted after X amount of days, but that's not to say that you can't delete it beforehand. It's not a retention deletion. Yeah, so I said it's not a retention policy, but if you do have a retention or deletion or a legal hold compliance feature enabled within your tenant, then those take precedence on the file itself, right? So, so if you have that, those will take place. If a recording is deleted, the administrator or SharePoint administrator can retrieve it from the first recycle bin, so they can go back and get it within 90 days of the deletion. The user also gets a notification via email that a file is being deleted as well. You have the ability to set the timeline from, I think it's 1 day to 273 years. Or if you do it through PowerShell, I mean, you can set it to -1, which basically disables the expiration ability as well. And then another thing to note is that it only starts flagging new recordings enabled in Microsoft Teams. Nothing existing or any files that were moved from Stream or files that are still in Classic Stream, all those files will still be there. And I think that is it for this feature. So then the next one I'm going to roll into is your favorite browser, IE11 desktop, is going to be retired in 5 months. So June 15th, 2022. The application will be disabled, I think, disabled. And then in future Windows Update versions, it will actually be removed from your system, Windows 10 systems. If you do have applications that you want to still use IE11 for, there's actually an extensive process you have to go through. You can reach out to Fast Track, but basically you have to do a site discovery, which will take 3 to 4 weeks as far as what the application needs are. And then go through sort of a guided process there. One thing that I have noticed is that if you already uninstall the IE11 app from your Windows 10 desktop, and I think you're on 1903 or higher, then you need to install Edge WebView 2. Otherwise, it will break the add-ins, Office add-ins. So like Viva won't load. In PowerPoint, you can insert forms into that as well. So you want to make sure that you have that application or that WebView installed, in conjunction when you're uninstalling IE11. So with that, I'll pass it over to Kurt. What do you got?
All right, thanks, Habib. Yeah, there's some changes coming with Exchange Online that you'll want to be aware of. One of them is really significant, and it was announced in October of 2022, and it's about the upcoming API deprecations in Exchange Web Services API for Exchange Online. And EWS is a very important set of APIs. It's a whole umbrella of APIs that a lot of software, a lot of homegrown solutions, a lot of stuff that integrates with Exchange Online is dependent on. So they announced it in October 2022 that they're going to deprecate 25 of the least used APIs in EWS as of March 31st, 2022. So that deadline's coming up quick. Now I know EWS fairly well. Those 25 APIs that are being deprecated, they truly are the least used. They're not widely adopted by many people or many software packages. If you go on Microsoft's tech community site and just search for EWS API deprecation, they actually list the 25 APIs that are affected. And also, Microsoft was able to send a message center update to those tenants that are still using those APIs. So if you didn't get a message center post, you're probably not using those Exchange Web Service APIs in your Exchange Online tenant. One other note, though, after that March 31st date, they will be phasing out other EWS APIs, which is probably even the bigger impact on people and software. They're looking to replace those EWS APIs with Graph, but they don't quite yet have a one-to-one replacement. So I would just keep your eye out for some potential new news post March 31st. Another change that's coming revolves around the plus addressing for Exchange Online customers. For those not familiar with plus addressing, it allows you to just create a new email address for an existing mailbox by putting a plus and then a tag. So Microsoft announced support for plus addressing in Exchange Online in September 2020 as an opt-in feature, but they made it the default for new Exchange Online customers. They've got a bunch of feedback since then, and they recently decided, based on that feedback, that they'll include a feature that allows you to turn off plus addressing. And one of the challenges with this new feature is if you have a legacy mailbox with a plus sign in it, it'll break. There'll be email routing issues. So the action there is you'll want to look at retiring any email addresses, legacy email addresses that you have that contain a plus sign, either hosted or Exchange Online, to avoid any email disruptions. And the last change in the Exchange front is anti-malware policies. So this revolves, or this is in regards to quarantine notification for recipients. And basically, you set that today in a UI dedicated to anti-malware policies. And starting March 2022, which is coming up shortly, that's going to go away, that UI, to configure quarantine notifications for the recipient. And that'll be moved to quarantine notifications, which is generally a new feature, but it's available in part of the M365 anti-malware policies. So the action there is just to migrate those quarantine notifications for recipients from the old UI to the Microsoft 365 anti-malware policies, the quarantine notifications. So with that, that's a lot, but I hope that was useful in terms of just giving a rundown of all the latest breaking changes that could disrupt your life. So hope that was useful, and we'll see everybody on the next podcast. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.